The confrontation that changed my life. How I defended my mother's memory in front of everyone. My name is Daniel. I'm 33 years old. And I'm writing this because I know many people go through similar situations, but often don't have the courage to share it. A little over a year ago, I was in one of the most contradictory moments of my life, about to get married and completely devastated by the loss of my mother. I worked at a tech company, was financially well off, had my own home, and everyone around me said my life was perfect. But no one knew the emptiness I carried since my mother's accident. Before everything happened, I had always been the guy who avoided conflict, always seeking peace and trying to please everyone. I thought that was what made me a good person. My life before was simple and peaceful. My mother was my safe haven, my reference to everything that was right. She had a huge heart, and since I was a child, I saw her helping people without expecting anything in return. When I started dating my ex-fiancée, she welcomed her as a daughter. Not just her, but my ex's entire family. My mother helped financially, took care of her siblings, even signed an important document for them to get a loan. I thought all of this was viewed with affection. So, when she passed away, I believed those people would do everything to honor her memory. But what I experienced was just the opposite, and that's when everything began to crumble. The first few weeks after my mother's death were a blur in my mind. I was grieving, trying to stay functional so I wouldn't completely fall apart. My ex-fiancée seemed like a support system at that moment, calling me, visiting me, telling me she understood my pain. That's what made me believe I was with the right person, that she would be there for me through the hardest times. So, even though my heart was still aching, I continued with my wedding plans. I thought maybe focusing on that would help me fill the void. And for a while, I convinced myself of that. But little by little, small behaviors began to bother me. Sarcastic comments about my mother, jokes about me being too clingy, and trying to avoid conflict, I simply ignored them. But everything took a different turn at the engagement party. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, the beginning of a new phase. Her family had organized everything. In the house, my mother had helped finance. I was nervous, partly because I missed her, partly because something in the air didn't feel right. During the speech, my ex's parents started making jokes about my mother, calling her nosy, saying she meddled in everything, and laughing as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I froze. I looked around and saw forced laughter, uncomfortable looks. And there they were, mocking the woman who had done so much for them, mocking the one I loved most. My stomach churned, my head began to spin. I realized then and there that everything I believed about these people was a sham. I stood still, my hands shaking and my throat dry. Part of me wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that someone would soon realize the absurdity and change the subject. But with each new joke, each mocking laugh, I felt my patience wearing thin. I looked at my fiancée, waiting for some sign, any indication that she too thought it was wrong. But what I saw was a smile that split me in half. It was as if she were enjoying herself, as if this were all just another funny moment to get a laugh out of. In that instant, I knew something had broken inside me. The image I had of her shattered before my eyes. I don't remember exactly how I got up, but suddenly I was standing, grabbing the microphone. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. I felt every eye turn to me, some surprised, others just curious. I took a deep breath and began speaking. I talked about my mother, about everything she had done for that family. I shared details that perhaps half the room didn't even know. How many times she had helped financially, how many nights she had stayed to babysit my fiancé's siblings so they could go out and have fun. And I concluded by saying, with all the firmness I could muster, that there was no way I would marry someone who would allow my mother's memory to be disrespected. The silence that fell over the room was deafening, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I was doing the right thing. The reaction was immediate, as if I'd dropped a bomb in the middle of the room. My ex-fiancée tried to grab the microphone from me. Her parents started accusing me of overreacting, and some of her family shook their heads in disapproval. I could see the anger in their eyes at me for shattering the perfect happy family scene, but I no longer cared. My focus was on defending my mother, on making it clear that I would never allow her name to be trampled on. My friends looked at me in surprise, but some of them smiled discreetly as if thinking, "He's finally asserted himself." My decision was made there in front of everyone, with no turning back. The party turned into a battlefield, and I made no effort to put out the fire. I left the party without looking back, accompanied by some cousins and my father, who was visibly emotional. In the car, the messages started arriving, an avalanche of calls, voicemails, attempts to make me back down. My ex-father-in-law yelled in the voicemails, "My ex-fiancée," cried, saying I was destroying everything over a joke. But I felt no regret, just a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because it was the end of a cycle I had idealized, and relief because I was finally seeing the truth. That night, I went to sleep heartbroken, but with a clear conscience, and that, for the first time in months, brought me a peace I couldn't even remember. In the following days, I experienced a veritable emotional roller coaster. My phone was non-stop. Half the messages were from people congratulating me on my courage, saying I'd honored my mother's memory. The other half came from my ex's family, trying to turn the tables, accusing me of being ungrateful, immature, saying I'd ruined their daughter's life. They conveniently ignored all the humiliation they'd caused. My ex-fiancée called me crying, saying she hadn't realized that she'd been swept up in the situation. But it was too late, because I remembered all the little things I'd ignored, all the microaggressions against my mother I'd overlooked. This was the truth I needed to face. I'd been cheating on myself for a long time. There were moments when I almost gave in, moments when the loneliness weighed heavily, when I wondered if I was making a rash decision. But whenever those doubts arose, I remembered the look of disdain I saw on her face that night, the laughter that echoed as she mocked the one who raised me with so much love. And then I returned to my center. My father was a great support to me. He said something that stuck with me. "Son, sometimes it's better to be alone than in bad company, and no one who disrespects their mother deserves a place in your future." I knew he was right. The pain would pass, but the regret of having tolerated it would remain forever, and I didn't want to carry that burden. That week was a turning point. I decided not only to end the engagement, but to cut every ties that bound me to that family. I cancelled everything: the wedding venue, the honeymoon, the photographer. I lost money, of course, especially the deposit on the venue, but I knew my dignity was worth much more. I asked for the ring back, and after much resistance, she finally gave it back. It was as if each step I took to sever that bond gave me back a piece of myself. I realized how much I had lost myself trying to please people who never truly respected me. And that was when the true breakthrough began. It wasn't just about ending an engagement, it was about reclaiming who I was before I sacrificed myself for others. I began to reconnect with myself in simple ways that were deeply meaningful. I started visiting my mother's grave more often again, without the burden of shame I'd been carrying. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had always quietly warned me, but I ignored them. I also allowed myself to feel everything: the pain, the anger, the relief. I repressed nothing. There were days I cried myself to sleep, and days I laughed alone, remembering the good things my mother taught me. Over time, I began to understand that my biggest mistake had been normalizing disrespect. And that was exactly what I was fixing, rebuilding my self-esteem brick by brick, at my own pace, in my own way. As the months passed, the pressure from my ex-fiancée's family eased. When they realized I wasn't going back, they began to disappear, as if they'd never been a part of my life. I confess that at first, their silence felt strange, but then it became a relief. I needed peace. I needed space to rebuild myself. I began investing more in myself, in hobbies I'd neglected, like photography and hiking. It was like relearning how to breathe. With each small achievement, a new trail hiked, a well-taken photo, I felt more whole. I no longer wanted to live to please anyone. I wanted to live in a way that would make my mother proud, even when she was no longer here. It was during this period that the greatest transformation took place within me. I understood that respecting my mother's memory was, in fact, respecting myself as well. Everything she taught me about character and generosity couldn't be discarded for convenience. I began to better filter who I let into my life. I learned to say no and set boundaries. I also became more attentive to the small signs I'd previously ignored. I understood that those who don't respect our origins and our pain also don't respect who we truly are. And most importantly, I realized it's better to walk alone, with dignity, than surrounded by people who belittle us. At the end of the year, I did something I'd been putting off since my mother passed away. I traveled to a place she'd always dreamed of visiting. It was a simple trip, nothing luxurious, but full of meaning. I remember sitting by a lake at dusk, feeling the wind on my face, and for the first time in so long, feeling true peace. It was as if I'd finally freed myself from everything that held me back, from other people's expectations, from invisible pressures, from the burden of always having to please. I allowed myself to feel proud of my journey for having put an end to a toxic situation before it consumed me completely. When I returned home, I seemed like a different man. I still missed my mother, but it was a different kind of longing, lighter, more honorable. My friends said my demeanor had changed, that I seemed more serene, more assertive, and it was true. I was no longer the guy who accepted everything in silence. Today, I choose my battles, and whenever I have doubts, I ask myself, would my mother be proud of this decision? If the answer is no, I back down. If it's yes, I move forward, fearlessly. That was the biggest turning point in my life, realizing that true overcoming isn't forgetting the pain, but learning to live with it in a way that strengthens us, not destroys us. Over time, I learned to see that phase as a turning point. Before, I saw the breakup as a failure, something that exposed and embarrassed me. But little by little, I understood that it was a silent victory. It's not every day that we have the courage to break the cycle, to stand up for ourselves in the face of so much pressure. Many people in that same situation would have swallowed the disrespect, gone through with the ceremony, and feigned happiness to avoid causing trouble. But I no longer wanted to live by appearances. I wanted a clean, authentic life, where I could look in the mirror and be proud. And that's what I achieved. The ability to put my integrity above all else. A lot has changed since then. My circle of friends has transformed. I'm surrounded by fewer people, but with people who truly care about me. At work, I also felt more confident expressing my opinions without fear of seeming like the complicated guy. And even in relationships, I've started to see everything through different eyes. Today, I pay much more attention to how a person treats others, how they handle difficult moments. Because I know that says more than any pretty words. I'm in no rush to start a new relationship. My priority now is to maintain the peace I've achieved and continue to honor who I am and where I come from. Recently, talking to a friend, he asked me if I felt regret. And for the first time, I answered without hesitation, no. I don't regret exposing the truth, defending my mother, setting a limit where many would prefer silence. Of course, the pain existed and still exists, but today I see that this pain was necessary to show me who was truly on my side. I realized that it's never too late to start over, to make difficult decisions in the name of one's own dignity. Life went on, and I moved on stronger. And that, for me, is a kind of victory that no one will ever take away. Today, I use this story as a daily reminder. Whenever I'm faced with a difficult situation, I remember the boy who once swallowed everything to keep the peace. And I remember the man who, even trembling, stood up to defend what was right. It's not easy to take a stand, especially when it involves people you once loved. But it's liberating. I know my mother, wherever she is, would have been proud. And I'm proud too. Not for avoiding pain, but for facing it head-on, for respecting my history and my roots. That's the kind of strength no one can take away from me anymore. Today, I understand that true overcoming isn't pretending nothing happened, but learning to rebuild after a fall. It was a slow process, full of setbacks and bad days, but I came out the other side more whole. I returned to dedicating myself to the things that make me feel good. I valued my true family even more, and I learned to filter who deserves to be by my side. Sometimes, loneliness is better company than toxic people. It wasn't a fairy tale, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And every small choice, every limit I learned to impose was a personal victory that transformed me profoundly. If I can take away any lesson from all this, it's this. Don't let the fear of losing someone make you lose yourself. Don't accept less respect than you deserve, especially when it involves someone you love and who is no longer here to defend themselves. Life has taught me the hard way that dignity is not negotiable. I don't have all the answers, but today I live with much more peace, a clear conscience, and the pride of having honored the memory of the person who loved me most in this world. And that, as simple as it may seem, was the greatest gift I could give myself